My name is Sophia. I am 28 years old, and my own flesh and blood, my sister, kicked me out of her wedding the very night before the ceremony was supposed to happen. Before I tell you how I exposed a lifetime of lies and deep family betrayal with a single conference call, I want you to let me know where you are watching from in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel, because I know I am not the only woman out there who has had to walk away from toxic family members. It all started with a text message. It was the exact kind of message that makes your stomach drop all the way down to the cold hardwood floor. The time on my digital clock read exactly 11:47 at night. It was the night before my sister Melissa's absolute dream wedding. I was sitting on the edge of my bed. The room was completely silent, except for the faint sound of traffic from the city streets several floors below me. My phone was resting on the nightstand next to me. Suddenly, the screen lit up, casting a harsh, bright white glow across the dark bedroom. The phone buzzed. It vibrated against the wood of the nightstand. The sound was so loud in the quiet room that it made me jump slightly. I reached out and picked up the phone. The glass screen felt cold against the palm of my hand. I unlocked the screen and opened the message app. The text was from Melissa. I read the words slowly, letting them sink into my brain. Do not bother showing up tomorrow, Sophia. You are no longer welcome at my wedding. I read the sentence once. Then I read it twice. I just stared at the glowing letters. There was absolutely no explanation attached to those words. There was no follow-up text saying we need to talk. There was no phone call. There was no apology. It was just a cold, hard, and final dismissal. For a very long moment, I just sat there on the edge of my mattress. The glow of the screen reflected in my eyes. The phone felt incredibly heavy in my hand. I felt a strange hollow sensation open up in the center of my chest, but I was not shocked. That is the saddest part of this whole situation. I was not shocked at all. I was deeply disappointed, because that is the emotion I always felt when it came to my family. But shocked? No. This brutal text message was just the grand finale to a lifetime of being the family's resident disappointment. I placed the phone face down on the nightstand. I slid it right next to a heavy set of keys. These keys were not for my car. They were made of thick, polished brass, and they were engraved with a very discreet, elegant logo for Grandview Hospitality. It was a company no one in my family had ever bothered to ask me about. I looked at those keys. The metal caught the faint amber light from the street lamp outside my window. Then I looked back at the dark rectangle of my phone. A cold, quiet calm washed over my entire body. I felt my tense shoulders drop. I took a deep breath in, filling my lungs with air, and let it out very slowly. Melissa did not know it, but she had just handed me the matches and pointed directly to the perfectly manicured garden she had spent 8 months cultivating. She had no idea she was the one who was about to get burned. To understand why a sister would do something so incredibly cruel, you have to understand the dynamic of my family. You have to understand that there were always two distinct realities existing under the exact same roof. There was the reality they all lived in, and then there was my reality. In their world, I was Sophia Hartwell, the 28-year-old underachiever. I was the one with the little job at some no-name event planning company. They thought I spent my days arranging napkins, picking out seat covers, and taking lunch orders for more important people. In their minds, I was the one who drove a beat-up Honda Civic from my early college days. I remember the smell of that car perfectly. It was a mix of old coffee, stale air, and a vanilla air freshener hanging from the rearview mirror. They thought I lived in a cramped, dark apartment on the absolute wrong side of town. To them, I was a walking, talking object of their pity. I remember a few years ago when we attended my great-uncle's funeral. We were all standing near the reception hall, wearing dark clothes, holding small cups of weak coffee. My father was talking to his brother, and he pointed at me across the room. He did not know I could hear him. He said, "Yes, Sophia is still doing that party planning thing. We hope she figures her life out eventually. He sighed, as if my very existence was a heavy burden he had to carry. I just gripped my coffee cup tighter and walked away. Then, there was my actual reality. In my reality, I got up at 5 o'clock in the morning every single day. I did not do this out of desperation. I did it out of sheer drive and determination. I would wake up, make a strong cup of black coffee, sit by the large glass window, and review complex vendor contracts before the sun even came up. That little job they always sneered at was actually a position I created entirely for myself. I was the founder and chief executive officer of a multi-million-dollar hospitality empire. We owned and operated some of the most exclusive, high-end event venues on the entire East Coast. That cramped apartment they always pictured me crying in was actually a sleek, minimalist service flat. I kept it in the city strictly for late nights at the office. It was incredibly convenient, just a stone's throw away from my actual penthouse overlooking the city skyline. I never invited them to the penthouse. I knew exactly what they would say. They would accuse me of renting it just to show off, or they would find a way to belittle the decor. And that beat-up Honda Civic? I kept it on purpose. I kept it because the engine had a very specific, rough hum that reminded me of exactly how hard I had to work to get where I am today. It kept me grounded. Every single time I turned the key and heard the engine sputter slightly before roaring to life, I remembered the days when I had to scrape together loose quarters from the bottom of my purse just to put 2 gallons of gas in the tank. The blatant favoritism in my family started very early. My parents had always catered to Melissa. When I was in high school, I worked part-time at a diner to save money for college. I thought my parents were matching my savings. But when senior year arrived, I found out the truth. They had completely drained my college fund. They took every single penny of it to pay for Melissa's elite, private dance academies, her expensive costumes, and her travel expenses for competitions across the country. I had to take out massive student loans and work double shifts to survive. I remembered my college graduation day like it happened yesterday. I had spent 4 years studying in the library until my eyes literally blurred. I had missed social events. I had worked until my feet ached. The day of the graduation, the sun was shining so brightly it made my eyes water. The campus was packed with proud families holding balloons and flowers. I stood in the massive staging area in my black robe. I smoothed down the front of the fabric, feeling a surge of intense pride. I had graduated with top honors. My name was called out over the giant stadium loudspeaker with a special distinction. I walked across the wooden stage. I shook the dean's hand. I felt the heavy weight of the summa cum laude plaque in my hands. I stepped down from the stage and immediately scanned the massive crowd in the bleachers. I looked everywhere for my parents, Richard and Carol. I searched for a waving hand, a familiar smile, any sign that they were there to witness the biggest achievement of my life. They were not there. The seats I had saved for them were completely empty. I stood in the hot asphalt parking lot for a full hour after the ceremony ended. Other families were surrounding me, taking pictures, laughing, hugging their children. I just stood by my Honda Civic, holding my heavy plaque, feeling completely invisible. Finally, their car pulled into the lot. They were 20 minutes late to the aftermath. They had missed the entire ceremony completely. My father stepped out of the driver's side and walked over to me. He handed me a wilting, sad-looking bouquet of flowers wrapped in cheap, crinkly plastic. It clearly came from the discount bucket at a gas station on the way over. "Sorry we are late, honey," my dad said. He clapped me on the shoulder heavily, not even looking at the plaque in my hands. We had to catch Melissa's dance recital. She won first place in the regional qualifiers. Can you believe it? The judges absolutely loved her routine. I looked over at my mother. She had not even stepped out of the car. She was sitting in the passenger seat, busy fixing Melissa's hair in the reflection of the visor mirror. My heavy plaque felt like a useless piece of cardboard in my hands. I did not scream. I did not cry. I just nodded slowly, opened the back door of my car, and placed the plaque on the faded fabric seat. That was the established pattern of my entire life. My successes were always tiny, forgettable footnotes at the very bottom of the page. Melissa's successes were always the bold, flashing, front-page headlines. Let us fast forward to just a few hours before Melissa sent me that cruel text message. I was sitting in my city service flat. The sky outside the large floor-to-ceiling window was turning a deep, bruised shade of purple as the sun went down over the buildings. The city lights were just starting to turn on. I was staring at a heavy award sitting on my wooden bookshelf. It was tucked away behind a row of thick business books. I walked over to the shelf and moved the books aside. I picked up the award. It was made of heavy, solid, crystal-clear glass. The engraved letters read Tri-State Area Entrepreneur of the Year. I traced my index finger over the cool letters. I had never taken it home to show my parents. There was absolutely no point. They would have just asked me if I bought it at a trophy shop to make myself feel better. The silence in the room was broken by the sharp ringing of my phone. It was Anna, my chief operating officer and my absolute rock. We had built Grandview Hospitality from the ground up together. I answered the call and put her on speakerphone as I walked into the kitchen to pour myself a glass of cold water from the refrigerator. Are you absolutely sure you want to go to this rehearsal dinner tonight? Anna asked. Her voice was laced with the deep, genuine concern of someone who knew every detail of my past. She knew all the horror stories. She knew about the ignored birthdays, the subtle insults at the dinner table, the blatant favoritism. I sighed loudly. I leaned my back against the cool marble counter and looked at my reflection in the dark kitchen window glass. I looked tired. I have to try, Anna, I said. My voice sounded exhausted. I have to do it for them. It is one last time. I want to see my sister get married. I want to be the bigger person. You do not owe them anything, Sophia, Anna said softly, but her tone was incredibly firm. You need to remember who you are. You need to remember the empire you built. You are not the person they think you are. I know, I replied. But if I do not go, they will use it against me for the rest of my life. They will say I was jealous. They will say I ruined her big weekend. I am just going to go, eat the dinner, smile, and leave early. All right, Anna said, sounding unconvinced. But keep your phone on loud. If you need me to call you with a fake emergency, you just send me a text with a single period. I thanked her and hung up the phone. I walked into my bedroom closet to pick out a dress. I did not want to wear anything from my designer collection. I picked out a simple, elegant, navy blue dress. It was very well made, but it was not flashy at all. I paired it with simple black heels and a small clutch. I wanted to blend into the background. I did not want to draw any attention away from Melissa. This was her weekend. I grabbed my Honda keys and walked out the door. The drive to the restaurant took about 45 minutes. Melissa had chosen a ridiculously expensive place downtown. It was the kind of restaurant that had heavy velvet curtains in the windows, gold-plated door handles, and a line of luxury cars parked out front. I pulled my faded Honda Civic into the valet line. I parked it right between a pristine white Porsche and a sleek black Mercedes. The valet attendant in the red vest looked at my car, then looked at me, raising his eyebrows slightly. I just handed him the keys, gave him a polite smile, and walked toward the heavy wooden doors of the restaurant. As soon as I walked through those doors, I knew I had made a massive mistake. The hostess led me to the private dining room in the back. The air inside the room was thick with the scent of roasted meats, expensive red wine, and heavy, suffocating judgment. The room was decorated with massive floral arrangements that probably cost more than my first car. My family was already seated at a long, polished oak table. Brendan, Melissa's fiancé, was sitting at the head of the table. Brendan's family had money. It was old money, and they made sure everyone in a 10-mile radius knew it. Most of the judgment in the room was coming directly from Brendan's mother, Eleanor Keller. Eleanor was a woman who wore her wealth like a heavy suit of armor. She had perfectly coiffed blonde hair, diamond earrings that caught the light every time she moved her head, and a tight, practiced smile that never reached her cold eyes. I walked over to the table and took my assigned seat near the very end, far away from the bride and groom. My mother gave me a quick, tight nod. My father did not even look up from his menu. Eleanor Keller leaned forward in her chair. She looked me up and down, starting from my hair, moving down to my simple navy dress, and finishing at my practical shoes. Her gaze lingered on my outfit, clearly calculating its worth in her head and finding it severely lacking. "Sophia, dear," Eleanor said loudly, making sure the entire table could hear her. Her voice was dripping with a very specific kind of condescending sweetness. It was the exact tone people use when speaking to a small, slightly confused child. "Brendan tells me you work in events. Is that right?" I felt my jaw tighten instantly. I took a deep breath, forcing my facial muscles to form a polite, even smile. "Yes, Mrs. Keller. I am in the hospitality industry." "Oh, how quaint," she continued. She picked up her crystal wine glass and took a slow, delicate sip. "That must be so interesting. Helping people plan their big days. Setting up chairs, arranging the little flowers on the tables, making sure the caterers do not burn the chicken. It is honest, hard work." I looked down at the crisp white cloth napkin in front of me. I picked it up and folded it carefully on my lap, smoothing out the fabric with my hands. "Something like that," I managed to say quietly. The dinner service began. The waiters brought out plates of perfectly seared steak and delicate fish. The conversation around the table dragged on painfully. Eleanor held court, and she used every opportunity to not so subtly compare my supposedly modest career to her son's roaring success in the corporate finance world. She talked loudly to my father across the table. "Richard, you should see the new office Brendan just got. He just received a massive promotion at the firm. The views are simply spectacular." My father nodded eagerly, looking completely desperate for her approval. "That is wonderful, Eleanor. Just wonderful. Brendan is a very smart young man." "He certainly is," Eleanor said proudly. "And his new salary is just beyond anything we expected at his age. He is setting up a very aggressive financial portfolio for Melissa. They will never have to worry about a thing." She took another sip of wine. "Of course, he knows how to handle money. He has been managing a large family inheritance since his grandfather passed away. It takes a certain kind of intellect to handle real wealth." She paused, looking around the table, before letting her gaze land directly on me again. "Speaking of money, Brendan's colleague is going through a terrible divorce right now. It is incredibly messy. They are fighting over custody of the kids and every single penny in the bank. It just goes to show you, you need to marry someone who brings equal value to the table. Would you not agree, Sophia?" The implication was heavy and toxic. She was implying that I had no value. I looked across the table at my parents. I could feel them shifting uncomfortably in their expensive wooden chairs. But the heartbreaking truth was that they were not uncomfortable for me. They were not angry that this woman was insulting their daughter. They were uncomfortable for themselves. I could read their faces perfectly. They were agonizing over the embarrassment they felt I was causing them by simply existing in the same room as the wealthy Keller family. They wished I was invisible. I shifted my gaze down the table to Melissa. She was sitting next to Brendan, wearing a stunning white silk dress. I could see a dark storm brewing in her eyes. Melissa was always a sponge for social pressure. If someone she deemed important felt a certain way, Melissa immediately adopted that feeling as her own. Eleanor was squeezing that sponge incredibly hard, making Melissa feel deeply ashamed of her poor, unsuccessful older sister. The dinner plates were finally cleared away by the silent waitstaff. The waiters came back around and poured expensive champagne into everyone's glasses for the toasts. I stared at the tiny bubbles rising to the top of my glass. Suddenly, Melissa pushed her chair back. The wooden leg scraped loudly against the floor. She stood up. She picked up a heavy silver spoon from the table and tapped it sharply against the side of her crystal champagne glass. The sharp clinking sound cut right through the low chatter of the dining room. "If I could have everyone's attention," Melissa said loudly. Her voice was trembling slightly. She smoothed down the front of her designer silk dress with shaking hands. The entire table went completely quiet. The waiters stopped moving in the corners of the room. Everyone turned in their seats to look at the glowing, beautiful bride. She absolutely would not look at me. Her eyes darted around the room. She looked at Eleanor, who was smiling approvingly. She looked at Brendan, who gave her a supportive nod. She looked at our parents. But she refused to look down to my end of the table. "I just want to make a very quick announcement," Melissa began. She took a deep breath, stumbling over her words slightly. "After a lot of thought, and in consideration of both of our families, we have decided it is best if Sophia does not attend the wedding tomorrow." The silence that followed that sentence was deafening. It was thick and heavy, like wet concrete. I could hear the low hum of the air conditioning vent in the ceiling above me. I felt the blood rush violently in my ears. The room suddenly felt incredibly hot. "It is just," she continued. Her voice was gaining a little more confidence now that she had dropped the bomb. She was feeding off Eleanor's approving look. "You do not really fit the aesthetic of the wedding, Sophia. You have never really put any effort into these kinds of elegant things. Our photos are going to be published in a magazine. And we do not want Brendan's family to feel uncomfortable or out of place having to explain your situation." It felt like a physical punch to my gut. All the air violently left my lungs. I sat completely frozen in my chair. My hands were resting flat on the table, gripping the white tablecloth. I slowly turned my head and looked at my parents. I waited for them to do something. I waited for my father to stand up, slam his hand on the table, and say this was ridiculous and cruel. I waited for my mother to reach across the table, grab Melissa's hand, and tell her she was making a terrible mistake. I waited for them to protect me. My mother stared intently at the empty space on the table where her dinner plate used to be. She did not blink. She did not move a muscle. My father cleared his throat loudly. He reached forward, picked up his crystal water glass, and took a long, slow sip. He looked up at the ceiling molding. No one said a single word. They were just going to let this happen. They were actively sacrificing me at the altar of Eleanor Keller's approval and Melissa's vanity. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not throw my napkin on the floor or knock over my chair. I did not cause the dramatic scene they probably expected me to cause. I calmly reached down and picked up my small black clutch from the floor. I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back with absolute control. I used my own composure as a weapon. I stood tall, smoothing down my navy dress. I looked directly down the table at Melissa. Finally, she was forced to meet my eyes. For a split second, I saw a flicker of genuine guilt behind her makeup, but it was quickly swallowed by a look of stubborn defiance. "I understand," I said. My voice was completely even. It did not shake at all. It was smooth and cold. And then I turned around. I walked across the thick carpet. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors of the private dining room, and I walked out, leaving the suffocating silence behind me. I walked out of the restaurant, handed my ticket to the valet, and waited for my Honda. The cool night air hit my face. I got into my car, gripped the steering wheel, and drove back to my apartment. And that is exactly how I ended up sitting on the edge of my bed at 11:47 at night, reading a text message that confirmed everything I already knew. I looked at the keys to Grandview Hospitality sitting on my nightstand. The venue Melissa had booked for her massive, expensive, magazine-worthy wedding was called Willowbrook Gardens. It was a stunning estate with sprawling lawns, ancient stone arches, and incredibly strict rules. What Melissa did not know, what my parents did not know, and what the arrogant Keller family did not know, was that Willowbrook Gardens was the crown jewel in the Grandview hospitality portfolio. I owned the venue. I owned the stone arches. I owned the sprawling lawns. I owned the very ground she was planning to walk down the aisle on. I picked up my phone. I wiped away a single tear that had managed to escape and roll down my cheek. I wiped it away fiercely, my sadness hardening into absolute steel. I opened my contacts list and found Anna's name. It was late, but I knew she would answer. I pressed the call button. The phone rang twice before she picked up. "Sophia?" Anna said. Her voice was thick with sleep, but alert. "Are you okay? Did you send the period?" "I am fine, Anna," I said. My voice was steady now. I was completely focused. I was all business. "I need you to open your laptop." "Okay." I heard the rustle of sheets and the click of a lamp turning on. "I am opening it." "What happened at the dinner?" "I will tell you the details later," I replied, pacing across the hardwood floor of my bedroom. "Right now, I need you to pull up the Hartwell Keller event contract. The one for Willowbrook Gardens tomorrow." I heard the rapid clicking of keys through the phone speaker. "I have it open," Anna said. "I need you to activate Clause 7B, I instructed clearly. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Anna knew every contract we drafted by heart. "Clause 7B, she repeated, her tone completely shocked. "Sophia, that is the immediate termination clause. If we pull that, the event is cancelled instantly." "I am fully aware of what the clause means, Anna." "Activate it." "On what grounds?" she asked, typing rapidly. "The reason for termination is a direct breach of the client code of conduct," I stated, staring out my window at the city lights. "Specifically, actions causing severe brand damage and a hostile environment." "Sophia, are you absolutely sure about this? This is nuclear. The wedding is in less than 14 hours. "I have never been more sure of anything in my entire life," I said softly, but with absolute conviction. "I want an official notification of contract termination sent directly to their wedding planner's email inbox within the next 10 minutes. Do not contact the client directly. Only contact the planner." "Understood," Anna said. I could hear the fierce loyalty returning to her voice. She knew my family. She knew they deserved this. "Drafting the termination notice now. It will be sent from the corporate legal email address." "Thank you, Anna. Get some sleep." I hung up the phone. I walked over to my closet, took off the navy dress, and hung it up carefully. I put on my pajamas, climbed into bed, and pulled the covers up to my chin. For the first time in my entire 28 years of life, I did not feel like the family disappointment. I felt like the CEO. I closed my eyes, and I slept better than I had in a very long time. The next morning, the sun rose brightly, pouring golden light through my large bedroom windows. I woke up at exactly 6 o'clock without an alarm. I stretched, walked into the kitchen, and started the coffee maker. The rich smell of coffee filled the apartment. I poured myself a large mug, grabbed my laptop, and sat down at my kitchen island. I opened the financial news, checked the stock market ticker, and took a slow sip of my coffee. My phone started blowing up exactly at 7 in the morning. The screen lit up with an incoming call from Melissa. I watched her name flash on the screen. The phone vibrated violently against the marble counter. I did not touch it. I just watched it ring until it went to voicemail. 10 seconds later, it rang again. This time it was my mother. I watched the screen. Voicemail. Then my father called. Voicemail. The chaos was starting right on schedule. They were waking up, getting ready for the biggest day of their lives, and their expensive wedding planner was finally opening her morning emails. I took another sip of coffee. The silence in my apartment felt luxurious. I opened a new tab on my laptop and began reviewing a proposal for a new property acquisition in the city. At 7:30, a text message came through from my father. I leaned over to read it from the lock screen. Sophia, call me immediately. There is an emergency with the venue. The planner is hysterical. Answer your phone. I swiped the notification away. I was not going to answer. Not yet. I wanted them to feel the full weight of panic. I wanted them to experience a fraction of the anxiety they had put me through my entire life. At 8 o'clock, my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed a number I actually did want to answer. I had the number saved in my contacts. It was David, the head of security for Willowbrook Gardens. David was a former police officer, built like a brick wall, and absolutely loyal to my company. I picked up the phone. Good morning, David. Ms. Hartwell, David said. His voice was deep, professional, and slightly urgent. I apologize for calling you so early on a Saturday, but we have a developing situation at the main front gate. Go ahead, David. Tell me what is happening. A Mrs. Carol Hartwell and a Ms. Melissa Hartwell are currently at the security checkpoint, he reported, the sound of walkie-talkie static in the background. They are causing a significant disturbance. They are banging on the gates and yelling at my staff. I leaned back in my chair, a small, cold smile forming on my lips. Are they? Yes, ma'am, David continued. They arrived with 2 cars full of bridesmaids and makeup artists. They are aggressively demanding to be let onto the property immediately. They claim they have a wedding here today. I see, I replied calmly. David, are their names on the authorized access list for today? No, ma'am. That is why I am calling. The system shows their event contract was officially terminated last night by corporate. They are not on the list, and the gate code has been changed. Then follow standard procedure, David, I instructed, my voice unwavering. The property is closed to them. Do not let them through the gates under any circumstances. If they refuse to leave the driveway and continue to block traffic or harass your team, you are authorized to contact local law enforcement to have them removed for trespassing. Understood completely, Ms. Hartwell, David said. We will hold the line. Have a good morning. You too, David. I hung up the phone. I could picture the scene perfectly. Melissa, standing in her expensive matching silk getting ready robes, screaming at a heavy iron gate that refused to open. My mother, frantically dialing her phone, trying to figure out who to bribe or yell at to fix the problem. 10 minutes later, my phone rang again. It was my father. The caller ID flashed his name aggressively. This time, I decided to answer. I pressed the green button and held the phone to my ear. Hello, Dad, I said smoothly. Sophia. My father yelled into the phone. The sheer panic in his voice was a completely new sound. I had never heard him sound so desperate. Sophia, what in God's name is going on? I am just having my morning coffee, Dad. What seems to be the problem? The problem, he sputtered, his voice cracking. The problem is they are not letting Melissa into her own wedding venue. The security guards are threatening to call the police on your mother. Melissa's wedding planner just forwarded me some crazy legal email claiming the contract is cancelled. The caterers are stuck in the parking lot. The florist is threatening to leave. It is a complete disaster. That sounds incredibly stressful, I said evenly, taking a bite of a piece of toast. Stressful? It is a catastrophe. You work in events, Sophia. You know these people. You have to do something. Call someone. Pull some strings. Fix this. Why do I have to do something, Dad? I asked. My voice dropped, becoming dangerously quiet and sharp. Because this is a disaster. Brendan's family is going to be arriving at the hotel soon. If they find out the venue is locked, it will be a complete humiliation. We need to talk. All of us. Right now. No, I said simply. What do you mean, no? Sophia, I am demanding that you help your sister. I am not going to call anyone, Dad. And I am not going to drive down there to be screamed at. I paused, letting the silence stretch over the phone line, listening to his heavy breathing. Fine. I will set up a video conference call for exactly 10 o'clock this morning. I will send a link to your email. Make sure you, Mom, and Melissa are all sitting in the same room, looking at the camera. A video call? Sophia, we do not have time for a business meeting, we need the gates opened. 10 o'clock, Dad. Be there, or I will turn my phone off for the rest of the weekend. I hung up before he could argue any further. I finished my breakfast, took a shower, and dressed in a sharp, tailored black blazer. I wanted to look exactly like the executive I was. I went into my home office, sat down in my leather desk chair, and opened my video conferencing software. I sent the link to my father's email address. Then, I sent a separate message to Mark Feynman, the head corporate counsel for Grandview Hospitality. At exactly 10 o'clock in the morning, the video call chimed. 3 boxes popped up on my large computer monitor. In the main box, I saw my family. They were crammed together on the sofa in my parents' living room. The scene was an absolute train wreck. My father's face was bright red, the veins in his neck bulging against his collar. My mother looked like she had been crying for hours, her face was blotchy and she was clutching a crumpled tissue. And Melissa? Melissa looked completely broken. Her carefully styled hair was a messy nest on top of her head. Her expensive makeup was smeared under her eyes, leaving dark streaks down her cheeks. She was wearing a sweatpants and a t-shirt, clutching a throw pillow to her chest. A small, petty part of me deep inside my chest genuinely enjoyed seeing them look so miserable. Sophia, thank God, my dad started immediately, leaning toward the laptop camera and trying to take control of the situation. His voice was loud and commanding. We do not have time for games. You need to call those people at Willowbrook Gardens right now and fix this mess. Tell them there has been a massive misunderstanding and that the Hartwell family needs those gates opened immediately. I do not think I can do that, Dad, I said smoothly, leaning back in my leather chair, perfectly framed in my camera. What do you mean you cannot do that? He snapped. You work in this industry. Just tell them you are a colleague. Beg them if you have to. This seems to be a complex legal matter now, I replied, keeping my face completely devoid of emotion. I am just an event planner, remember? I am a bit out of my depth with corporate contract terminations. What are you talking about? Melissa sobbed loudly, dropping her head onto her hands. My wedding is ruined. Everything is ruined. The flowers are dying in the vans. Well, since this is clearly a very serious legal issue, I continued, ignoring her tears, I thought it would be best to have some professional guidance on the call to explain things to you. I clicked a button on my keyboard. With a soft chime, a new window appeared in the video call. It was a man sitting in a sleek, glass-walled office. He was wearing a sharp, custom-tailored gray suit and a blue tie. He looked incredibly serious and incredibly expensive. Everyone, I announced calmly, gesturing to the screen. This is Mark Feynman. He is the head corporate counsel for our company. Mark looked into his camera and nodded curtly. He did not smile. Good morning. Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell, Miss Hartwell, he began. His voice was deep, authoritative, and completely devoid of any personal emotion. He sounded like a judge reading a verdict. My parents stared at the screen, looking entirely confused. Corporate counsel? My father repeated slowly. Sophia, what is going on? Who is this man? Please let Mr. Feynman speak, I commanded sharply. Mark adjusted his glasses and looked down at a document on his desk. As per the legally binding event contract signed by Ms. Melissa Hartwell, he read clearly, specifically Section 7, Clause B, any action taken by the client, or members of the client's immediate party, that is deemed detrimental to the public brand image, reputation, or operational standards of Grandview Hospitality gives the company the absolute and unilateral right to terminate the contract immediately, without refund. He paused, letting the heavy legal jargon hang in the air. The public dismissal and humiliation of a guest at a pre-event function, Mark continued, his tone icy, especially when that guest is an immediate family member of the client, and the action creates a hostile environment, falls squarely into the category of brand damage. The company exercises its right to refuse service to clients who exhibit such behavior. My dad stammered, his face twisting in confusion. He leaned closer to the laptop screen. Grandview Hospitality? Who the hell is that? We did not sign a contract with some massive corporation. We signed a contract with the local management at Willowbrook Gardens. Melissa finally lifted her head from her hands. Her eyes were red and swollen. She stared at me through the camera lens, her voice a raw, raspy whisper. How could we possibly know about some stupid, hidden rule in a corporate contract? We just wanted a nice venue. That was my cue. I had waited my entire life for this exact moment. I leaned forward in my chair, resting my elbows on my desk, and looked directly into the camera lens, making sure I made eye contact with all three of them. You should have known, Melissa, I said. My voice was no longer quiet. It was strong, clear, and vibrating with absolute authority. You should have known about the contract, because the contract, with all of its stupid, hidden rules, was drafted, approved, and signed off on by the legal owner of Willowbrook Gardens. I paused. I let the heavy weight of the moment hang in the digital air between us. I watched their confused faces. And that owner, I said, my voice unwavering and crystal clear, is me. I clicked a button on my software and shared my screen with them. On their laptop monitor, a massive, official PDF document appeared. It was the official state business registration and incorporation documents for Grandview Hospitality LLC. The document was covered in official state seals, legal signatures, and corporate stamps. I moved my mouse cursor slowly across the screen, highlighting a very specific section of the document in bright yellow. Right there, in plain, undeniable black and white text, under the heading Founder, Chief Executive Officer, and Sole Managing Member, was my name. Sophia Hartwell. The silence that followed was not just quiet. It was an utter, complete, world-shattering silence. It was the sound of an entire false reality collapsing in on itself. I sat back in my chair and watched their faces crumble in real time on the video feed. First, it was deep, furrowed confusion. They squinted at the screen, trying to make sense of the words. Then, the confusion shifted into stark disbelief. Their mouths opened slightly. Finally, the horrifying, crushing dawn of understanding washed over them. My mother's hand flew up to cover her mouth. She let out a small, strangled gasp, her eyes wide with shock. My father just stared at the screen, all the color draining rapidly from his face. He looked like he had just been physically struck. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Melissa looked like she had seen a literal ghost. She stared at my name on the document, her jaw slack, her eyes darting back and forth as if trying to find a mistake, a typo, anything to prove this was a prank. But it was not. It was the cold, hard truth they had ignored for years. My dad finally found his voice. It was no longer loud and demanding. It was a choked, pathetic whisper. Sophia. He started, his eyes shifting from the document back to my face on the camera. You own Willowbrook? You own the whole company? I do, Dad, I replied calmly. I built it from the ground up. While you were paying for dance recitals and worrying about Eleanor Keller's opinions, I was building an empire. He swallowed hard. He looked at Melissa, who was now trembling violently, and then back at me. The panic in his eyes was absolute. You can fix this, right, Sophia? You can make a phone call and open the gates. Please. She is your sister. Please do not do this to her. I let the pathetic question hang there in the air for a long moment. I looked at the three people who had spent my entire life making me feel incredibly small, insignificant, and worthless. I looked at the sister who had thrown me away like garbage just 12 hours ago to impress her wealthy future mother-in-law. Then, I gave them my final, devastating truth. There is absolutely nothing to fix, Dad, I said, my voice as hard as stone. A corporate business decision has been made. The contract is void. The gates will remain locked. Melissa let out a loud, wailing sob and buried her face in the sofa cushions. However, I continued, raising a single finger. As a gesture of goodwill, and to prevent you from completely embarrassing yourselves in front of the Keller family, there is one solution available to you. I clicked my mouse again, closing the legal document and bringing up a new image on the shared screen. It was a high-resolution photograph of a breathtaking, massive estate. It was made of gray stone, covered in creeping green ivy, surrounded by sprawling, manicured lawns and an enormous glass conservatory. Rosewood Estate is currently available today, I stated professionally. There was a cancellation earlier this week. It is our most exclusive, highest-tier property in the state. I saw a sudden, desperate flicker of hope ignite in their eyes. My father leaned forward, nodding rapidly. Yes. Yes, that is perfect, Sophia. Thank you. Thank you so much. Tell them we are coming. Hold on, Dad, I interrupted sharply. The standard commercial booking rate for a last-minute weekend event at Rosewood Estate is $50,000. I paused, making sure they heard the number clearly. Payable up front. In full. By wire transfer. Within the next hour, or the hold is released. My father's face went completely pale again. $50,000? Sophia, we do not have that kind of cash liquid right now. We already paid for Willowbrook. Consider the lost deposit at Willowbrook a penalty for breach of contract, I replied coldly. And consider this $50,000 a lesson in how the real world actually works. It is a lesson, Dad, that you never quite got around to teaching me. I shifted my gaze on the screen, looking directly at my mother, who was still holding her hand over her mouth. And as for the profits from this new booking, I said, my voice turning incredibly sharp. I will be taking the entire $50,000 and donating it in your name, Mom. I am donating it to that specific women's education and business fund in the city. You know, the one you once told me was a complete waste of time when I asked you for a small loan to start my business? My mother flinched as if I had thrown a glass of cold water in her face. I am doing it, I concluded, staring her down, just so you can finally see exactly how much value a vain, useless dream can actually create when you put the work in. I looked at the three of them one last time. They were completely silent, completely defeated, and entirely at my mercy. I will have the billing department send the wire transfer instructions to your email, Dad. You have 1 hour. I reached for my mouse. I will not be attending the ceremony, of course. I have a very busy weekend. Good luck. Before they could say another word, before they could beg or scream or apologize, I clicked the red button and ended the call. The screen went black. The silence returned to my office. I leaned back in my chair, took a deep breath, and felt a massive, heavy weight lift completely off my shoulders. I was finally free. Gemini said after I clicked that red button and the video call screen went completely black, I did not move for a very long time. I just sat there in my heavy leather office chair. I listened to the quiet hum of the air conditioning vent above my head. The silence in my apartment was profound. It was not the heavy, suffocating silence of the restaurant from the night before. It was a clean, sweeping silence. It felt like the air after a massive thunderstorm had finally passed. I leaned forward and looked at the clock on my computer monitor. It was 10:30 in the morning. The deadline for the wire transfer was 1 hour. I opened my email and kept the window open on my second screen. I stood up, walked into the kitchen, and poured out the rest of my lukewarm coffee into the sink. I washed the mug slowly, feeling the warm water rush over my hands. I was completely calm. I did not feel any regret. At exactly 11:15 in the morning, a notification popped up on my computer screen. It was an automated message from the corporate billing department at Grandview Hospitality. I clicked on it. The subject line read "Incoming wire transfer confirmed." My father had actually done it. He had liquidated whatever he needed to, swallowed his massive pride, and sent $50,000 directly into my company account. He had paid the absolute maximum premium to save his own face in front of the Keller family. I immediately forwarded the confirmation to Anna. I typed a quick message. "The transfer is complete. Inform the staff at Rosewood Estate that they have a last-minute booking. The Hartwell-Keller wedding is authorized to proceed. Treat them like any other paying client. Provide excellent service, but do not offer any complimentary upgrades. Charge them for every extra bottle of water." Anna replied 2 minutes later. "Understood. The team is on it. Are you going to be okay today?" I looked at her message. "I am perfectly fine," I replied. "Take the rest of the weekend off, Anna. You have earned it." I closed my laptop. I decided I was not going to spend the rest of the day sitting inside and thinking about them. I walked into my bedroom and changed into a pair of comfortable jeans and a simple white sweater. I grabbed my keys, went down to the parking garage, and got into my beat-up Honda Civic. I drove out of the city and headed toward the coast. I spent the entire afternoon walking along the cold, windy beach. I watched the gray waves crash against the rocks. I thought about the little girl who used to try so hard to get her parents to look at her report cards. I thought about the teenager who worked until her hands blistered because her parents had stolen her money. I realized that little girl and that teenager were finally safe now. I had protected them. The wedding happened. I did not see any pictures, and I did not ask for any details. I knew my staff at Rosewood Estate would do their jobs perfectly, and I knew my family would have to walk through the grand halls of my property knowing that every single brick belonged to the daughter they had thrown away. After that weekend, a heavy, strained silence fell over my life. 1 week turned into 1 month. 1 month turned into 3 months. The seasons changed. The green leaves outside my penthouse window turned orange, then brown, and then they fell to the ground. The winter brought heavy snow to the city. Through all of it, I did not receive a single text message, phone call, or email from my parents or my sister. It hurt, but it was a very clean kind of hurt. It was the pain of a deep wound finally being stitched up and starting to heal. I did not reach out to them either. I focused entirely on my life and my business. During those 8 months, Grandview Hospitality expanded rapidly. We acquired 2 new historic properties. I gave Anna a massive promotion, elevating her to the position of President of Operations. I doubled her salary, because she was the most loyal and hardworking person I had ever met. She deserved every single penny. I also dealt with a lot of complex situations during that time. I had one particular client who was going through a terrible, messy divorce right in the middle of planning a massive corporate gala at one of our venues. They were fighting over everything. They were battling over child custody, property rights, and who got to keep the social status they had built together. I had to sit in conference rooms with my lawyer, Mark Feynman, and mediate disputes just to keep the event on track. Watching those clients tear each other apart over money and pride made me appreciate my solitary, peaceful life even more. I did not have to answer to anyone. I did not have to pretend to be someone I was not. 8 entire months passed. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon in early spring. I had just returned to my penthouse after a long day of site inspections. My coat was wet, and my boots left small water marks on the hardwood floor near the entrance. I walked over to the marble console table where my building concierge placed my mail. I started sorting through the stack. There were glossy magazines, thick business catalogs, and plain white envelopes containing utility bills. Near the bottom of the stack, I saw a completely different kind of envelope. It was a simple, cream-colored envelope made of thick, high-quality stationery paper. There was no return address printed in the corner. My name and my home address were handwritten on the front in dark blue ink. I recognized the handwriting instantly. The looped letters and the slight slant were unmistakable. It was Melissa's handwriting. I stood perfectly still in my foyer. The only sound in the apartment was the rain hitting the large glass windows. I looked at the envelope. I did not tear it open in a panic. I took off my wet coat and hung it in the closet. I walked into the kitchen, filled the kettle with water, and turned on the stove. I prepared a cup of chamomile tea. I carried the hot mug and the envelope into my living room and sat down on my large, comfortable sofa. I took a sip of the hot tea. Then, I slid my finger under the flap of the envelope and opened it. Inside, there were 3 pages of matching cream-colored paper, completely filled with handwriting. I unfolded the pages, smoothed them out on my lap, and began to read. Dear Sophia, the letter began. I do not expect you to write back to this. I do not even expect you to finish reading it. If you throw this in the trash right now, I completely understand. But I needed to write this down, and I needed to send it to you. I adjusted my position on the sofa and kept reading. The wedding at Rosewood was beautiful. Your staff was incredible. But the entire weekend was a nightmare for me. The moment you hung up that video call, the reality of what I had done finally hit me. Eleanor Keller was furious. Not at you, but at us. When she found out we had lost the Willowbrook venue and had to pay double for a new location at the last minute, she looked at my family like we were common criminals. She spent the entire reception complaining about the unnecessary drama and whispering to her friends about how my family lacked basic grace. I felt a small, grim sense of satisfaction reading that sentence. But that is not why I am writing to you, the letter continued. After the wedding, when Brendan and I returned from our honeymoon, I could not stop thinking about you. I could not stop thinking about that document you showed us on the screen. So, I looked you up. I took another slow sip of my tea, my eyes scanning the blue ink. I looked up Grandview Hospitality. I read the business articles about you. I watched interviews you did with financial magazines. I read about how you started the company from absolutely nothing. I read about the long hours, the risks you took, and the incredible reputation you built in the industry. I sat in front of my computer and I cried for hours. I also did something else. I remembered what you said to Mom on that call. I drove into the city and I visited the Women's Education and Business Fund. I walked into their office. I asked them about the $50,000 donation you made in Mom's name. The director of the fund sat me down. She showed me with my own eyes the exact work they were doing. She showed me the job training programs, the small business grants for women leaving bad situations, and the educational workshops. She told me that your donation alone was going to fully fund 10 women through a year-long certification program. I felt a slight tightness in my throat. I swallowed it down and kept my eyes on the page. Sophia, I am so incredibly ashamed. I am not ashamed because you are rich and successful. I am ashamed because I never bothered to look at you. I never bothered to see you. My entire life, I lived in this little bubble where I was the star, and Mom and Dad made sure I never had to look outside of it. I knew they took your college fund to pay for my dance lessons. I knew it, and I never said a word because I liked the attention. I liked being the favorite. I let them treat you like a burden, and I joined in because it was easy. I threw you out of my wedding because I was terrified that Eleanor Keller would judge me, when I should have been terrified of losing my only sister. I do not expect you to forgive me. I do not deserve your forgiveness. But I wanted you to know that I see you now. I see exactly who you are, and I am in awe of the woman you have become. If you are ever willing to let me speak to you in person, I would like to buy you a cup of coffee. No pressure. No expectations. Just coffee. Love, Melissa. I lowered the pages to my lap. I looked out the window at the gray, rainy city. I sat there for a full hour, just listening to the rain and thinking about her words. The letter did not erase the past. It did not erase the years of neglect, the stolen money, or the cruel text message. But it was honest. There were no excuses in her words. There was no attempt to shift the blame. The next morning, I picked up my phone and sent her a text message. It was the first time I had contacted her in 8 months. Thursday at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The small coffee shop on 4th Street. Do not be late. I arrived at the coffee shop 10 minutes early. I wore a simple pair of dark jeans, a plain gray t-shirt, and a casual jacket. I did not want to wear a business suit. I did not want to look intimidating or powerful. I just wanted to be Sophia. The coffee shop smelled strongly of roasted beans and warm pastries. The sound of the espresso machine hissed loudly in the background. I ordered a black coffee, sat down at a small wooden table near the back window, and waited. At exactly 3 o'clock, the bell above the glass door jingled. Melissa walked in. She looked completely different than the last time I had seen her on that computer screen. She was not wearing designer clothes or heavy makeup. She was wearing a simple tan sweater and dark pants. Her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail. She looked nervous. She looked around the room, spotted me at the back table, and took a deep, shaky breath before walking over. "Hi," she said softly, standing awkwardly next to the empty chair. "Sit down, Melissa," I said evenly. She pulled out the wooden chair and sat down. She kept her hands folded tightly in her lap. We looked at each other across the small table. The silence between us was heavy and thick. It was not comfortable, but it was not hostile either. It was just incredibly awkward. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," she said, her voice barely louder than a whisper. "I read your letter," I replied, wrapping my hands around my warm coffee mug. "I meant every single word of it," she said quickly, leaning forward slightly. "Sophia, I am so deeply sorry. I have replayed that night at the restaurant in my head 1,000 times. I cannot believe I let that woman intimidate me into doing that to you. I cannot believe I sent you that text message." "It was not just the text message, Melissa," I said. My voice was calm, but very firm. It was the entire lifetime leading up to that text message. It was the graduation. It was the holidays. It was the fact that you and Mom and Dad were perfectly happy to let me be the family failure so you could feel better about yourselves. She closed her eyes and nodded slowly. "I know. You are right. Completely right. Brendan and I have been talking a lot. Actually, we have been doing couples counseling. Dealing with his mother is difficult. She is incredibly controlling. Everything is about appearances and who has the bigger inheritance or the better social standing. Living in her world is exhausting. It made me realize how toxic our own family dynamic was, because I was doing the exact same thing to you." I watched her face. She looked tired, but she looked genuine. "It is going to take a very long time, Melissa," I told her honestly. "A letter and a cup of coffee do not fix 28 years of damage. I am not going to pretend everything is perfect. I am not going to suddenly start coming over for Sunday dinners and playing the happy family game." "I do not expect you to," she said quickly. "I swear. I just want to start over. Even if it is just sending a text message once a month to ask how you are doing. I just want to know my sister." We sat in that coffee shop for another hour. We did not talk about deep, emotional trauma the entire time. The conversation eventually shifted to neutral topics. We talked about the weather. We talked about the traffic in the city. We talked about a new movie that had just come out. There were long, awkward silences where neither of us knew what to say. We just sat there, listening to the espresso machine hiss and watching the people walk by outside the window. But it was a start. It was a very small, fragile start, but it was real. A full year passed after that coffee shop meeting. The dynamic in my family slowly began to shift. It was not a magical, overnight transformation. It was a slow, cautious process. I was standing in front of my full-length mirror in my penthouse bedroom. I was adjusting the collar of a beautiful, emerald green silk dress. I paired it with a simple gold necklace and black heels. I picked up my clutch and walked out the door. I was going to a wedding. It was not my sister's wedding. It was the wedding of our older cousin, Mark. And the reception was being held at Rosewood Estate. I drove my Honda Civic up the long, winding gravel driveway of the estate. The massive stone building looked breathtaking in the afternoon sun. The green lawns were perfectly manicured. The giant glass conservatory sparkled in the light. I handed my keys to the valet attendant, smiled at him, and walked through the grand front doors. The main ballroom was filled with music, laughter, and the clinking of crystal glasses. The tables were decorated with towering arrangements of white lilies and roses. Waiters in crisp black uniforms moved smoothly through the crowd, carrying silver trays of champagne and appetizers. I walked into the room and immediately spotted my family. They were standing near a large window overlooking the gardens. My father was wearing a dark suit. My mother was wearing a tasteful blue dress. Melissa and Brendan were standing next to them. I took a deep breath and walked over to their group. As soon as I approached, the dynamic changed. It was subtle, but it was undeniable. The old dynamic was completely gone. They did not look at me with pity. They did not try to hide me from the other guests. Instead, they stepped back slightly. They gave me physical space. The looks on their faces were replaced by a quiet, very uncertain respect. "Sophia," my mother said softly, offering a polite, hesitant smile. "You look beautiful. That green color is wonderful on you." "Thank you, Mom," I said smoothly. "You look lovely as well." "The venue looks spectacular, Sophia," Brendan said, raising his glass of water toward me. "Your team runs a very tight ship." "Thank you, Brendan. I appreciate that." We stood together for a few minutes, making polite, surface-level small talk. It was not warm and fuzzy, but it was not hostile. It was completely civil. I realized in that moment that I did not need them to love me perfectly. I just needed them to respect my existence. Later in the evening, the band started playing upbeat music, and the dance floor filled with people. I stepped away from the loud music and walked out onto the wide stone terrace that overlooked the back gardens. The air was cool and refreshing. The gardens were lit up with hundreds of tiny, warm fairy lights strung through the trees. I was standing near the stone balustrade, enjoying the quiet moment, when my phone vibrated in my small clutch. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. It was a phone call from my dad. I looked back through the large glass doors of the ballroom. I could see my father standing near the bar on the other side of the room, holding his phone to his ear. He had stepped away from the loud music specifically to call me. I pressed the answer button and held the phone to my ear. I braced myself, wondering if there was an emergency or a problem with the venue staff. "Hey, my father said." His voice was hesitant. He sounded a little nervous. "Hi, Dad. Is everything okay? You are just across the room." "Everything is fine. The wedding is beautiful," he said quickly. "Listen, I just had a quick question. I did not want to bother you while you were talking to the other guests." "What is the question?" I asked, leaning against the cold stone railing. "Well," he started, clearing his throat. "I am thinking of moving some of my retirement funds around. I had been reading the financial news, and I was looking at this specific tech portfolio. I know Brendan works in finance, but his firm focuses mostly on large corporate mergers and handling massive inheritance accounts. I wanted a business owner's perspective. You built a company from the ground up. You know how to spot real value. What do you think about the current tech sector for long-term investment? I stood there on the terrace, surrounded by the faint sounds of laughter and music from a wedding I was truly, genuinely happy to be attending. I listened to my father's question. He was not calling to ask for a handout. He was not calling to complain about his life. He was not looking at me with pity or disappointment. He was asking for my professional opinion. He was asking for my expertise. He saw me as a peer. It depends on the specific portfolio, Dad, I answered, keeping my voice professional and calm. But generally, I would be very cautious with emerging tech right now. The market is highly volatile. If you are looking to secure your retirement, I would suggest looking at more established infrastructure funds or commercial real estate holding groups. They offer slower growth, but they are significantly more stable against market corrections. Infrastructure funds, he repeated, sounding genuinely interested. Okay. I will have to look into that. That makes a lot of sense. You know, I was reading an article last week about how commercial properties are adapting to the new economy. We talked on the phone for 10 minutes. We talked about interest rates, market trends, and long-term financial planning. It was the most normal, respectful conversation I had ever had with my father in my entire life. Thank you, Sophia, he said when we finally wrapped up the call. I really appreciate you taking the time to explain that to me. It gives me a lot to think about. You are welcome, Dad. Enjoy the rest of the reception. I hung up the phone and slipped it back into my clutch. I stood alone on the stone terrace for a long time. I looked out over the sprawling, perfectly manicured gardens of Rosewood Estate. I looked at the ancient stone arches, the bright fairy lights, and the dark silhouette of the trees against the night sky. I realized that my company, Grandview Hospitality, was not just a business to me. It was the absolute physical manifestation of my own self-worth. I had built it with my own hands, my own sweat, and my own tears. A waiter walked past me carrying a silver tray. I reached out and took a tall crystal glass of cold champagne. I held the glass by the stem. I did not raise it toward the ballroom where my family was dancing. I did not raise it toward Eleanor Keller or anyone else who had ever doubted me. I raised the glass up to the night sky. I made a quiet, private toast to myself. I realized then what true peace actually meant. Peace was not about forcing them to finally see my success. It was not about punishing them or making them suffer for what they did. Peace was about them finally seeing my actual worth as a human being. And more importantly, much more importantly, it was about me knowing deep down in my bones that I never, ever needed their permission to have that worth in the first place. I was enough, exactly as I was, and I had built a beautiful life for myself. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. It has been a very long, very painful journey, and I am still navigating the complicated family dynamics every single day. But I am finally happy. I am finally at peace. I would love to know your thoughts. Have you ever had to completely reset the boundaries with a toxic person in your life? Have you ever had to walk away from your own family to protect your peace and your future? Let me know your own story in the comments section below. I read every single one of them, and I know your experiences can help someone else who is going through a similar situation. And if you found any part of my story meaningful, empowering, or helpful, I would be so incredibly grateful if you would like this video and subscribe to the channel for more true stories. Stay strong, protect your peace, and always know your W.